Hello. My name's John. I'm an alcoholic. I've been through this process by the grace of God and 2 Big Book Step Study sponsors, and I'm currently making my amends, and I practice 9, 10, 11, and 12 on a daily basis, and I want to thank Mike for asking me. And I also found, since going through this process and being able to speak at these meetings, that I do not like to know what step I'm on, because I catch myself. If I know what step I'm speaking on, on the way to the meeting, I'll prepare my speech. I want to give you all the high points, make myself really look good. I want, and then after the meeting, you can come up and kiss the ring or whatever you want to do. But so I found I don't want to know what step I'm on. It's a lot easier for me that way. And so on the 3-hour ride down, I didn't know what step I was on, so I got to enjoy the scenery. I got to enjoy everything around me instead of me. And when I started my writing in May of '06, because I was seeing a counselor in White River Junction, Vermont. I was 5 years insane in AA. This is my 3rd time around. I couldn't understand why I was feeling like crap. I was starting to think that, Christ, is this all AA is about, is come here and be frickin' miserable and go to like 40 meetings a week? And fortunately, this counselor that I had been through the process, and I didn't know it. I knew he was in AA, but I didn't know what he had done. And so on our last session together, he said to me, he looked me right in the eye and he said, "Jesus, John," he says, "you're headed out the door for a drink." And I said, "Yeah, but I'm doing 20 meetings a week." He says, "I got a guy," he says, "that I want to introduce you to," and he says, "maybe he can help you." So that next Monday, the Wilmot Big Book Step Study meeting, which meets in Wilmot, New Hampshire, was apparently having their group anniversary. So he said, "You go there," and he said, "You ask for this guy." And I said, "Okay." So the guy was there, and I asked him if he would be my sponsor. He said he'd be honored, and he said, "Meet me before this meeting next Monday, an hour before the meeting." And all week I dreaded it. If some good-looking woman had said, "Meet me an hour before been no problem. But a guy, I had my doubts because I didn't know this guy. And so I met him, and I was there an hour, because what I've learned is this is my last stop. I've done everything else to try to stay sober, and I can't stay sober. I can't even stay sober in regular AA. I did that for 17 years, and I kept drinking. And unfortunately, I couldn't find anybody to take me through the steps. I got actually yelled at by guys in AA who had been around for 12, 15, 20 years when I would mention the steps. I had one guy kick me out of his business. I mean, he got so friggin' angry, and this guy was like 15, 16 years. Now I know it wasn't sober, it was just dry. And I'm thinking, Jesus, boy, these AA people suck. When you treat somebody like that, because when you go, when you're working with somebody, and so I just gave up. And apparently this guy knew it, and so he introduced me to this guy. So I got there, and I knew it was different, because it was John, make coffee, or 90 meetings in 90 days, or call me every day, or, you ought to get into district, area, and GSO, None of that. None of that. The first thing out of his mouth when I met him and I looked him in the eye was, "John, we're going to work the steps." And after 20 sponsors in AA, I knew there was something different about this guy. And so right off the bat, we did, like I said, there was no talk. He did share he must have seen the look on my face, because he did share with me about how before he did the process, he was sober. And he was ready to kill his boss. He had that much rage. That I could identify with. And next thing out of his mouth was he opened the book to A, B, and C. He asked me if I thought I was an alcoholic and my life was unmanageable. I said, 5 years prior to that, I got kicked out of the state insane asylum in Waterbury, Vermont for threatening a psychiatrist. And I don't hear many people in AA say they got kicked out of a state hospital. So I knew my life was unmanageable. And so he asked me B. He said, do you believe no human power is going to keep you sober? Well, the first time before I left AA and went drinking, I moved in with a sponsor. And he had a family. And apparently my attitude wasn't very good because he kicked me out a couple, 3 weeks later, and I got drunk. So when he asked me that B, I said, I knew. No, none of you people, not my sponsor, nobody on the face of this earth is going to keep me sober. And I said, yeah, he says, I know that. And then he asked me, the next statement he said was the one that I knew was going to set me free. He said, do you believe that God could and would if he were sought? And I knew it. I just knew that was the answer somehow. But I couldn't find anybody. I was like 2 months sober. I got brought back to the Barre, Montpelier, Vermont area when I got kicked out of the state hospital. And there was a guy that had 20, 21, 22 years. And everything in my life was gone. I had no car. I had to call for rides, which really stunk, me having to reach out for help. But it was a long walk to the meetings. So I called this guy one night and asked him if I could get a ride. Yeah. And he didn't have anybody else in the car, it was just him and me, and we were headed to the Montpelier meeting. And my next question was, how do you find God? I don't know, that was the question I asked him. Now, this guy had 21 years. And for almost 2 years, that was the last time he talked to me. He wouldn't talk to me anymore. Even in the car, he just shut right up. After the meeting, I had to ride with somebody else. And I'm thinking, Jesus. Then I began to realize that a lot of people with a lot of years in AA have no idea what the hell they're doing here. They have no idea about how to stay sober. They have no idea what the 12 steps are about. And I was shocked that this guy could not answer that question after 21 years. And then I found out that he really didn't have God. He had himself. And so anyways, after I answered yes to A, B, and C, we got on our knees, we held hands, and I don't know if you've ever been to the Wilmot meeting, but when you walk through the little foyer into the hall, right on the right, there are 2 huge windows that go from almost floor to ceiling. And then the rest of the hall is dark. And my sponsor, who I got a resentment at that point, knelt right in front of them 2 damn windows, and there's a house right next door, So I'm thinking, Jesus, what the hell if these people see me holding a guy's hands? What the hell are they going to think? But anyways, I did it because I had nothing left. I had no more answers. And we said the 3rd step prayer, and when he got up, he said, on your way home, he says, I want you to stop at Walmart in Claremont and buy yourself a 5-subject notebook and some black pens. And see, I still had that insanity in my head. And I said, John, I says, I really don't like black pens. I'd rather use blue. I said, what the hell have I got to use a black pen for? And the next thing he said just cemented for me that this guy meant business. He said, in the big book it says we get this down in black and white. He had to say no more. My 2 sponsors that took me through these steps were just like that. No, give me a 2-hour definition of why I got to find God, or, geez, I got to do some research if I'm going to find God. They were very short answers, just like that. And boy, I'll tell you, for me, they made a whole lot of sense. So I did that, and then the next week I started my writing. That was in May of 06, and in July of 07, 13 months later, I finished my writing. And I had 5-subject notebooks. I was 53 years old when I started my writing, and I'll tell you, I hated everybody in my life. When I'd made my list of people that I had a resentment at, it was long. I didn't like people. And the reason was that because when my father stopped drinking when I was 8, my household went into a rage. And every day for 20 years, my mother and me were on the receiving end of his rage. So when I figured that out, when I found out he was going to do that, I just pulled into myself. I mean, I didn't talk to anybody. It talks about here about telling somebody about ourselves. That was back in 1960. And from 1960 to May of 2006, when I started writing my 4-step, I told nobody nothing. I was married for 12 years. I didn't tell my ex-wife anything about me, nothing. I didn't know how to. Nobody ever taught me that, it's okay to reveal your feelings, or if you're having a problem to talk to somebody about that. Nothing. I learned that you take everybody else's inventory just like my father took mine. That's where I learned that. And so if my ex-wife knew anything about me, she had to get it from my mother or my father. It didn't come from me. So anyways, I got my writing done in July of 2007. And in that time, my first sponsor had gone through a divorce and he moved. And he said, you need to find a new sponsor. So I found a guy down in Seabrook, New Hampshire. I met him at the Tuesday night Stratham, New Hampshire Big Book Step Study meeting. And so I called him and I asked him if he would, I told him what was going on, and I asked him if he would work the steps with me, and he said he'd be honored. Nobody ever told me they were honored to do anything for me. I got kicked out of state insane asylums. I got locked up in asylums because I wasn't worthy of being on the streets. I went through 2 treatment centers because I'm insane. They call them treatments. It's like treatment center. They want you to make you feel good. Well, this is a treatment center. No, it isn't. It's an insane asylum. Just like the Concord State Hospital, Vermont State Hospital, and psych wards. That's all it is. It's an insane asylum. I went through 2 of those, and most of the people I had there didn't know anything. They weren't alcoholics, and so when I left, of course, I drank. So anyways, when Earl agreed to be my sponsor, he took over, and I was talking with Mike before the meeting. There was a guy up here sitting with him I think he's working with, and my sponsor, when he he read what I wrote, he always had a red pen. He's just like a teacher, well, you got to change this, you got to change that. I had a lot of red marks in my writing, and that was because I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I finally had 2 sponsors who knew the solution to the disease of alcoholism, and that's the 12 steps in the Big Book. And they knew how to carry that message to me. So in July of 2007, I called him up. I lived in Claremont, he lived in Seabrook. It was a 2-hour ride one way. So he said, come down to the house tomorrow, which was a Sunday morning, and he says, I'll look at your writing. And well, when he used to look at my writing before, he'd open the book and he'd read a bunch of stuff, and then he'd read out some stuff, and that I had to change. So I got down there and I handed him the book, and he just went, and I take it, this ain't right. He didn't even look at anything. He didn't read anything. So he said, what do you got planned for today? And, even after all that writing and cleaning house, I still had doubts that this was going to work, because I was still the old John. I might have put this stuff down on paper, but it's still in here, And if I'd known what he said, I would have told him I had a date Sunday afternoon. But I told him, I said, I have nothing planned. He said, good. He said, go up on the deck. He said, set up 3 chairs and I'll be right up. So I went up on the porch, and they live right on the ocean. So we were looking over the beach and the ocean. And so when he came up, I said, so what the hell's the 3rd chair for? He says, is Susan, I asked if his wife was going to sit in on this too, And that's what I thought. And he said, no, John, he said, that chair is for God. That chair is already taken. And I really didn't want to do that. I didn't want to read it to anybody. You know, here I am, I'm 54 years old, and I'm still sick. I have no friends in AA. I had nothing. I was just going to meetings. And so every time that I read, we got on our knees, we held hands, and we said the third step prayer. And then I started to read. And we would do 2 hours in the morning. It was 12 Sundays over a 4-month period. There were a couple weekends there. He went on vacation, so I couldn't read. But I started to read. And so we would do 2 hours in the morning. I'd go down at 8. We'd go 8 to 10, and then we'd take lunch. And then about 1, I'd read for 2 more hours. And, you know, and I'm still a self-centered SOB, you know? So I wanted to get this done, because I hear people who, you know, when they're reading, oh, geez, we did a marathon weekend, you know, we got this thing done and over with, and that's what I was looking for. So I said to him, I said, how come we just don't sit down and take like 2 or 3 days and just read this crap? And he said, because John, I can't handle that. I never thought of his well-being, you know? And when he said that, I understood why, you know? And I love my sponsors for that, because number one, they told me the truth, and they didn't beat around the bush. And I don't do that with people. And a lot of people don't like that, so they go find another sponsor or they go drink. I really don't care. I sponsor exactly the way my sponsors sponsored me. And so I started reading. But in the back of my mind was my sex inventory. And I'll tell you, that was the hardest thing I had to do, because I made a mess of my sex life, because nobody ever explained to me about sex. So I learned about sex in the construction trades. You know? If you get laid, you just put another nickel in the bank. That's all you do. And that was my thinking. So I had stuff in my sex conduct. The resentments took quite a while. The fears, man, I just zoomed through those. And then when it came to the sex stuff, I had a couple, 3 pages in there where he wasn't going to find out about what I did. But today I know that every time we got on our knees, held hands, and said the third step prayer, when I got to those pages, I couldn't believe it. I read right through. I read them everything. It says in here, you know, and I highlighted this in pink when I read it, when I got the Big Book Step Study. We pocket our pride and go to it, illuminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. And I knew that if I did anything short of that, I was going to drink again. You know? So from July of 07 to November of 07, those 12 Sundays in between there, I read. And I'll tell you, it sucked. Reading the crap that I did over 53 years of my life. Same miserable, stupid, puny, asinine stuff. You know? I got about halfway through my reading it. I'd take it. I don't know if I want to do this. Because I knew the sex stuff would have come up. And that was really going to hurt. And that's the biggest part. That is the most pain that I suffered, was getting rid of my sex conduct. So anyways, I read through it. And while I was reading, he had his dog, Maggie, would come up and lay down and listen to my 5th step. And so the day I got done, Earl got up. He gave me a hug. And he said, welcome to AA. And I couldn't believe it. Here I am. I'd been around AA for 17 years, and I was never in AA. I was never in it. I was never a part of AA, because my mind was always someplace else on me. And so I left. And I was talking to a young lady before the meeting who's reading, And I was 54 years old, 55 years old. And I had a 2-hour ride home from Seabrook to Claremont. And for the first time in my life, that 2-hour ride, I had the most peace and contentment I had ever had in my life when I got rid of that crap. I couldn't believe it. I was telling her, I said, you know, it's like today when somebody tailgates me or cuts in front of me. You know, I still have that old, you know, I'd like to run them over. But that day, that 2-hour ride home, I couldn't tell you. If somebody could have been a foot off my bumper, I didn't know it. All I knew was I was driving from Seabrook to Claremont. I would like to say that I've had that kind of peace and serenity since, but you have to move on in the process. And I couldn't believe it. I thank God for it. Because in the morning I get up and I pray to God on my knees, and at night I get on my knees and I do my 11-step inventory, and I keep my connection with God strong. And it was a couple of years ago I was talking to Earl about that. He said to me, he says, you know, he says, you know, Maggie listened to your 5th step. And I said, yeah. I said, I think she listened to just about all of it. And he said, you know, she's just starting to straighten out from listening to your 5th step. And I'm thinking, you son of a bitch, you know. But he's right, you know. I don't know what effect it had on her, but she was with him, with me, all through my 5th step. And I love my 2 sponsors. I mean, I was sick. They spent a lot of hours with me showing me how to do this and how I was going to get better. And what a gift. Best thing that's ever happened to me, the most important fact of my life today is the grace of God and Alcoholics Anonymous. Everything in my life other than that, my 2 kids, my 2 boys, my 4 grandkids, everything is either 3rd or 4th. As long as I keep God up front and Alcoholics Anonymous in my life, the main purpose, I'm going to be okay today. You know? And what this did, by reading this to my sponsor, and I didn't know it at the time, it opened up my life to sharing with somebody else. Because when I did my 3rd step, my sponsor said, when you complete this process, will you carry this message to another man? And I will. And I've talked to guys where I've had to share my sex life because they talk about it. They wanted to know about it. And I've had to share some of that sex stuff with them. And my life is pretty much an open book, talking with newcomers. I've talked to guys with 30 years in AA who are friggin' nutcases. You know, they really are. They're very angry. And they come to a Big Book Step Study meeting and they're hurting. But this shows me why I need to keep doing this on a daily basis, or I'm going to end up like these guys. I had all 3 of them that I talked to were full of rage, and they were over 25 years. And I told them what I had to do to get better. And all 3 of them said, oh, well, geez, I got 30 years. I don't need to do this. Haven't seen them since. I don't know where they are. Maybe they drank, because I know people with a lot of years in AA who drink again. A lot of them drink and blow their brains out, but a lot of them just hang themselves or blow their brains out without picking up a drink because the insanity returns. And my 2 sponsors taught me how not to let that insanity come back. And that is a huge gift of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 steps. So if you're writing, keep writing. It will end. And if you're reading, geez, keep reading. You know, it's just going to get better. It keeps getting better on a daily basis. As long as I stick with the God and the 12 steps and you people in AA. So thanks.